Sourdough bread seems to be all the rage right now. Have you ever wanted to learn how to make it? Well, you've come to the right place because in today's video, you're going to learn the fundamentals of sourdough. If you follow along with us, you know that we don't even eat bread, so you're probably wondering why we're doing this video. You see, Maplewood Homestead helps to facilitate and coordinate homestead classes by local homesteaders for local homesteaders in areas that they're passionate about. They can share skill sets that they love and they're good at with others who are looking to learn. Today's teacher is Miss Tori Russell. She has a passion for sourdough, and what she's going to teach you today is how to make your own starter, how to keep it going, and different flours you can use besides the conventional white flour. So let's get started. This would be a great video for you if you're gluten intolerant as well, as she gives you options to that.
She's like, yeah, everybody's doing sourdough now. It's like, what is sourdough?
Tori started down this road because her daughter had a gluten sensitivity, and it led her to the world of sourdough.
What's happening in a sourdough culture is really what's at the gist of this. And I'll go more into the different flours at the end of this also. But a sourdough culture is a culture, you've got basically flour and water only that allow fermentation of wild yeasts in the air and bacteria to grow, which as what the wild yeasts and bacteria do their natural thing, they produce lactic acid and carbon dioxide, which is why you get bubbles. It's yeast farts. It's why it's so bubbly. And this one's like super gurgly right now. We can pass that around eventually. But it's a fermentation process. The bacteria and the yeasts are literally digesting the starches and the glutens in whatever flour you're using. When you bake it into bread, all of the bacteria is killed. So it's not a probiotic like a kombucha or anything because you've cooked it, you've killed all the bacteria. But they've done their work of basically pre-digesting the starches and the glutens that irritate our digestive systems anyway. So I came to find out through Miriam's situation that I think most people have some amount of issues with gluten or wheat to some extent. It's a matter of bread is delicious and we're willing to tolerate a certain threshold of discomfort to be able to eat something yummy. So bloating, gas, minor stomach aches, heartburn, these are all symptoms of your body being your digestive system being very displeased with the bread that you're eating. But sourdough, whether it doesn't matter what kind of flour, sourdough has a way of neutralizing a lot of the aggravating effects of the wheat grain or whatever it is you're fermenting. So the reason I think that this is important in like a homesteading lifestyle, more self-sufficient lifestyle, is this is flour and water, and that's it. And this is how you leaven bread. You don't need anything else. You can make a loaf of bread with flour, water, and salt, period. Which is nice. It's very, very minimalistic. And if you get crazy and grow your own wheat, which my husband and I are talking ourselves into, it's going to be great. We have to work ourselves up. So that's why it's so beautiful. It's so simple and it requires very few ingredients. And it's cool. It's a pet. You feed it, you water it, you name it, you talk to it, and it feeds you. And it still lives. You don't have to slaughter it to eat it. Each sourdough starter is totally unique to the environment that it lives in. Has anyone ever heard of special fancy San Francisco sourdough starter? I know you can buy San Francisco sourdough starter online and people will pay good money for this. And it's special because a lot of them boast being like 200 years old or something like that. So Leonardo's just a baby, but that's like, sourdough is a living organism. And the yeasts and the bacteria that colonize a culture, a sourdough starter, come from the environment that it's fed in and the wheat that it's fed. So a San Francisco sourdough starter is only a San Francisco sourdough starter for as long as it is fed in San Francisco. And that's it. What is it? Molecular biologists or something, microbiologists have analyzed sourdough starters. So they'll buy a sourdough starter from San Francisco and then they'll fly it to another part of the country, feed it, and analyze it again. And it's a completely different makeup of microorganisms. So you're being cheated a little bit if you buy the San Francisco starter. The environment, the yeasts in the air, the yeast and bacteria on the grain itself that you're using, that's what makes this, the bubbles in it. So Everybody's is going to be different. This is currently Mount Pelia, Tennessee sourdough starter, and wherever you live and take it, that's what it's going to be later on. Sourdough starter from scratch, you literally mix up flour and water, you let it sit for a day, you take some of it out, you add more flour and water, you let it sit for a day, and you keep doing that over and over and over again. And within a few days, it took, I feel like I saw bubbles by day 2 or 3 in Leonardo. It starts to bubble and froth, and then it just gets really extravagant at some point. Okay, so taking care of a sourdough starter. I'm going to feed Leonardo for y'all. How about that? I want y'all to see, okay, there are 5,000 different ways to take care of a sourdough starter. And if you go down the rabbit trail of researching how to take care of a sourdough starter, you will find yourself in, my dad calls it analysis paralysis. Yeah, you gotta just kind of, just pick one and just dive in, and it's gonna work. The ancient Egyptians did this on accident. We can do this, you know? Okay, so when I do sourdough starter, I don't measure anything at all. It's not rocket science. And like I said, Leonardo's been going for 2 years, and maybe Vicky does hers differently. I don't know. Do you measure stuff?
It depends on the recipe.
Well, okay, in a recipe.
I stopped measuring.
Yeah.
Because I know what works for me.
Yes. For a recipe, you should measure everything. It works. I love using my scale, measuring everything in grams. For my starter, I measure nothing. I will always keep my starter pretty low. This is like the maximum amount of starter I'll keep in my jar regularly. I have depleted it down to like a spoonful. Okay, so I'm trying to get starter out for a recipe I have, and I realize, oh, I don't have enough. And after I've dumped everything I've got out, I can scrape up like this much left in the jar, and I leave it in the jar, and I pile in a bunch of flour. Are you gonna wake up for me? And again, my starter is 100% einkorn. I've never fed it anything else. Einkorn flour, which only matters if you have like a big sensitivity to something, okay? Maybe about that much. I eyeball it every single time. The point is, what you're looking for is a ratio. You want to feed your starter, your remaining starter, at least like 2 times. I've done several times, at least 2 times as much flour and water mixture as the amount of starter you start with, okay? So if my starter's coming up to here, I want to feed like up to here with flour and water. Again, this is bacteria and yeasts, and they're greedy. If they don't get fed enough, they panic and they make hooch, which isn't super practical. This is filtered water. You have to use filtered water. You use chlorinated city water, it dies. Okay? Filtered water.
So you can't use well water either?
I don't know about well water. You should look that up. I don't know.
Filtered water. Do you mean like through the refrigerator filter, or what?
It depends. It depends. You need something that's going to filter out chlorine. You can use bottled water, bottled distilled water. I have a 0 water filter that I bought at Walmart. It works great, and Leonardo's kicking. So you can use distilled water, yeah, as long as it's not chlorinated. I don't know about well water, if there's an advantage or disadvantage to it. And you mix. Mine's kind of thick. I'm going to add more water. You're looking for a thick pancake batter consistency. So again, enough flour and water to be like 2 to 4 times maybe the amount of starter you started with. Thick pancake batter consistency. So sometimes I'll add more water and I'll think, oh, it's a little thin, so I'll just add in more flour. And it's going to work one way or another. You just need lots of food, basically. The bacteria and yeast are greedy. You want way more food than bacteria and yeast. I apparently didn't explain that to one friend thoroughly enough, I suppose, when I shared some starter with her. And she hadn't baked with it in a while, and she's like, okay, I need to feed this to try to keep it alive. So she took it out of the refrigerator, and she had a good amount in the jar. She probably had about this much in the jar. And she didn't want to bake anything anytime soon, but she didn't want it to starve. So she said she put in a 1/4 cup of flour and enough water to make it the right consistency. And she woke up the next morning and there was a big layer of dark brown hooch on top. Which is not the death of sourdough, by the way. If that happens, you just pour out as much hooch as you can. Have you done this to yours yet? No? I've made hooch several times. You just pour out as much hooch as you can. I've used a paper towel to like daub it up, and you feed it, and it's off and running. Again, it's a living organism. It's going to balance out and heal. That's what we're looking for. This is fed Leonardo. Thick pancake batter consistency.
So
Gluten-free flours and pastas. They're great for people who cannot have gluten, but they have absolutely no nutritional value whatsoever. It's just starches and thickeners, basically, to be able to make something that's bread-like or pasta-like or something. There's nothing good to be had in gluten-free products. But several years before she was born, I remember learning about something called einkorn wheat. Has anybody ever heard of einkorn wheat? Hey, a couple of people. That was stashed in like the recesses of my subconscious as something that people who were sensitive to gluten could tolerate sometimes. So I eventually did learn more about sourdough after the whole 2020 thing too, and I found out how sourdoughing itself actually helps make wheat more digestible and much friendlier on the digestive system, especially for people with a sensitivity anyway. I was thrilled because it was much more like regular wheat than gluten-free products were. So I started doing a whole bunch of baking again, and Leonardo has been going strong for 2 years now. I have also tried regular yeasted things with einkorn also. We do a lot of that because my husband isn't the biggest fan of sourdough. That's actually changing some. And her stomach tolerates all of it just fine. Yeah, those look done, right? Okay, cool. If they're doughy, it's not my fault. It's Haley's fault. So we found out that her stomach was just fine on sourdough einkorn products, and we've never gone back. Okay, there are a lot of different flour options out there. When you go to the grocery store, you're basically getting one flour. And it's whatever is, it's whatever. We all see it grown all around here. There are, let's see. Okay, I want to talk about, first of all, the difference between whole grain and different types of flour. This is, like I said, wheat berries, and we can pass that around for people to look at. This is einkorn. It's very little. Modern wheat is much bigger. It's part of the reason einkorn was bred out of popularity. It's teeny tiny, and you have to grow a lot of it. But that's a whole grain. If you take that and you grind it up in your food mill, you have a whole grain flour. It's got the bran and the germ around the little starch inside, the little kernel of white starch inside. Who wants to help me with something? All right. This is flour I milled this morning. I'm going to have you, we're just going to put a spoonful in there and sift it. You can use the spoon to like rub it through. To make an all-purpose flour, you want to take the bran and the germ out of the wheat berry. So you mill it, you pass it through a sieve, and then I'm going to show y'all the result of this. You'll have basically an all-purpose flour down here, and the bran and germ will be left behind. You'll get to see it. Again, the problem is you're sifting the nutrients out of the flour. You're kind of cheating yourself a little bit. There are pros and cons because all-purpose flour is easier to work with. The reason being the bran and the germ milled up around that little starch grain, from what I understand, act as little tiny bits of fiberglass inside the bread dough, and they slice through gluten strands. Gluten is what gives us a big, fluffy, risen bread, and the bran and the germ tend to interfere with that. You have to choose sometimes between a healthy loaf of bread and a really fluffy loaf of bread. Let's see, when it comes to unbleached flour, when you've got all-purpose flour, there's bleached and unbleached. This that's coming down out of the sieve is an unbleached flour. Apparently, when you do this on an industrial scale, you have to sift the bran and the germ out and let it age for a time, and it takes time, which we in the modern world do not like using time or sacrificing any amount of that. So you can speed the process by adding benzoyl peroxide and chlorine gas to make it age faster, and it makes it a brighter white, and it makes it a softer texture. So you can get something very, very light and fluffy and cake-like. We're almost there. It's a painstaking process. This is not practical to do at home. I strongly advise you to just buy all-purpose flour if that's what you want. It's totally not worth it at all. Well, it depends. Okay. This, you can buy the wheat berries, and this is true for any wheat at all. You can buy the wheat berries and mill them in a grain mill yourself, or you can buy the whole grain flour, which is you dump these in the mill and that's what you get. Or you can buy an all-purpose flour. And my first einkorn flour I bought was all-purpose because I don't know what I was doing anyway. Mostly I do this because, yeah, it's way more nutritious. It's also a lot cheaper to just buy the wheat berries yourself. Okay, that's looking pretty good. We'll go and pass that around so people can see. We'll leave that in there. Thank you. Fun fact, when it comes to sourdough, in case I forget to mention it at the end, it's strongly advised that you use an unbleached flour, whether whole grain or all-purpose, doesn't matter. No bleaching in the sourdough starter. The fear is that, and it's not a fear because it's not like it's going to kill you. Maybe it will, but the fear is that the bleaching process of a bleached flour actually sterilizes anything that's left in the grain. And remember, the yeast and bacteria that we need to culture this to leaven bread are, you know, it's yeast and bacteria, and a lot of it is on the grain itself. So you can't get a leavening out of a sterilized. A lot of people don't like that. Some people do. And practically speaking, you will usually, with a whole grain flour, end up with a denser loaf. Okay? It's not going to rise as much. It won't be soft and fluffy and bendy. That being said, these rolls are half whole grain. We make some sacrifices here. Ancient grains that I keep referring to, I use almost exclusively einkorn in my kitchen. It is the oldest wheat. Yes.
Can you spell what
Einkorn is spelled E-I-N-K-O-R-N. It's great, yeah. Einkorn is the oldest wheat. People suspect that it was first discovered in like ancient southern Turkey, you know, where people started. And I don't know how many years ago. I think I saw like 10,000 years ago was the estimation. People stumbled upon this beautiful plant and they realized that if you smash it up really good, you can make stuff with it. It was einkorn. It's the first one. It's very, very basic DNA-wise, genetically. It has 12 chromosomes, I think. I don't know why we're counting wheat chromosomes, but apparently this matters. Einkorn has 12 chromosomes to its name. The modern wheat that you buy at the grocery store will have 42 chromosomes in it. The modern wheat you buy at the grocery store has these really long, luscious gluten strands that let you make soft, fluffy cupcakes and stuff. Einkorn's gluten strands are much shorter, which is why it's not popular. You're not going to get big, fluffy breads out of einkorn. I think it's delightful anyway. But it doesn't behave the same, and we've come to expect certain things from our bread products in Western civilization, and einkorn isn't it. But einkorn is the oldest of the wheats. It's teeny tiny. It's expensive as far as wheat goes. We also have emmer, which I think is the next step up from einkorn. Khorasan, also known as kamut, if anyone has heard of kamut flour, and spelt. Like I said, those rolls that we'll be eating in a bit are half whole grain einkorn, half all-purpose spelt flour. I've started introducing spelt flour in because the spelt does give the einkorn a lot more structure, a lot more oomph. But spelt is still one of the ancient grains. It's good for you still. Let's see. The ancient grains, einkorn, emmer, khorasan, and spelt, contain higher levels of protein, essential fatty acids, mostly unsaturated, phosphorus, potassium, lutein, and beta-carotene, iron, manganese, calcium, Bs 1 through 6, B12, folate, zinc, thiamine, niacin, riboflavin, selenium, magnesium, phosphorus, and vitamin E. I said phosphorus twice, but that's the idea. They're healthier grains. Again, we started breeding wheats intentionally to get things like longer gluten strands in the wheat, higher yield per acre, bigger wheat kernels, because it's much more convenient in a higher yield acre, that kind of thing. But we've sacrificed nutrition. This is going to be a much more nutritious product than anything you're going to find in the grocery store. Also, whole grains are living. They're alive. They'll last for a good long time like this. Once you mill them, they go rancid within like a few days. So you should really be questioning what's on the grocery store shelves. It's a big deal. Einkorn is the only wheat never hybridized. It's never been crossed with any other wheat strand. This is the same thing they found in southern Turkey 10,000 years ago, which is mind-boggling. And Egyptian pharaohs were buried with this stuff, by the way. Yeah. Like you go in a pyramid in Egypt, you're going to find bowls of einkorn berries. It's crazy.
There's more. Want to know more about the history of sourdough and additional questions and answers from this session? Go ahead and check out this video coming up next.